He sat down with a sheet of paper and tried to make a list of the women in his life. Right from the start, he met with defeat. In very few cases did he recall both names, and occasionally not even one. The women had become, quietly and perceptibly, women without names. Perhaps if he had corresponded with them more often, their names might have stuck in his memory because he would have had to write them on envelopes, but beyond the border of love, no amorous correspondence is carried out. Perhaps if he had been in the habit of calling them by their first names, he would have remembered them, but ever since the unhappy incident on his wedding night, he had decided to call all women only by tender, banal nicknames that any of them could at any time regard as her own. He filled up half a page. The experiment did not require that the list be complete, replacing a number of the forgotten names by some characteristic feature, freckled or school teacher and so on. And he tried to recall in each case the woman's curriculum vitae. This was a still worse defeat. He knew absolutely nothing about their lives. He therefore simplified his task and limited himself to just one question. Who were their parents? With the exception of a single case, he had known the father before he met the daughter. He didn't have the slightest idea. And yet in the life of each of them, parents must have played an enormous part. Surely they must have told him a lot about them. What value, then, did he place on the lives of his women friends if he wasn't ready to remember even the most basic facts about them? He admitted, not without some embarrassment, that women had meant nothing to him except as erotic experiences. He tried recalling these experiences at least. Randomly, he paused at the woman, nameless, he had designated as Doctor. What was their first lovemaking like? He pictured his apartment at the time. They entered and she immediately looked for the phone. In Rubens's presence, she proceeded to tell someone at the other end that she unexpectedly had to take care of a certain obligation and could not come. They laughed at this and then made love. Strangely enough, he could still hear this laugh, but could recall nothing of the lovemaking. Where did it take place? On the carpet? In bed? On the couch? What was she like between the sheets? How many times had they met since then? 3 times or 30 times? Why did he stop seeing her? Did he remember a single fragment of their conversations, which must surely have filled the space of at least 20 hours? Perhaps as many as 100? He vaguely recalled that she had often spoken to him of her fiancé. He had, of course, forgotten the gist of this information. A strange thing. What stuck in his memory was the fiancé and nothing else. The act of love was less important to him than the flattering and silly detail that on his account she had deceived someone else. He thought enviously of Casanova, not of his erotic achievements, which after all could be accomplished by most men, but of his incomparable memory. Some 130 women saved from oblivion with their names, their faces, their gestures, their statements. Casanova, utopia of memory. In comparison, how poor were Rubens's achievements? At one time, at the beginning of adulthood, when he had renounced painting, Rubens had consoled himself with the thought that learning about life was more important to him than the struggle for power. The life of his colleagues chasing after success seemed to him not only aggressive, but monotonous and empty. He believed that erotic adventures would lead him straight to the heart of life, a full, real, rich, and mysterious life. The bewitching and concrete life he longed to embrace. And now suddenly he saw that he had been mistaken. In spite of all his amorous adventures, his knowledge of people was exactly the same as it had been at the age of 15. All this time he had been coddling himself with the certainty that he had a rich life behind him. But the words "a rich life" were merely an abstract formula. When he tried to discover what this richness actually contained, he found nothing but a windswept desert. The hand on the dial let him know that from now on he would be obsessed only with the past. But how is one to be obsessed with the past when one sees in it only a desert over which the wind blows a few fragments of memories? Does that mean he would become obsessed with those few fragments? Yes. One could be obsessed even with a few fragments. Anyhow, let's not exaggerate. Even though he couldn't remember anything substantial about the young doctor, other women emerged in his mind with urgent intensity. When I say they emerged in his mind, how do I imagine this emergence? Rubens discovered a peculiar thing. Memory does not make films, it makes photographs. What he recalled from any of the women were at most a few mental photographs. He didn't recall their coherent motions, he visualized even their short gestures, not in all their fluent fullness, but only in the rigidity of a single second. His erotic memory provided him with a small album of pornographic pictures, but no pornographic film. And when I say an album of pictures, that is an exaggeration, for all he had was some 7 or 8 photographs. These photographs were beautiful, they fascinated him, but their number was after all depressingly limited. 7, 8 fragments of less than a second each. That's what remained in his memory of his entire erotic life, to which he had once decided to devote all his strength and talent. I see Rubens sitting at a table with his head supported on the palm of his hand, looking like Rodin's thinker. What is he thinking about? If he has made peace with the idea that his life is narrowed down to sexual experience and he's again to only 7 still pictures, 7 photographs, he would at least like to hope that in some corner of his memory there may be concealed some 8th, 9th, or 10th photograph. That's why he is sitting with his head leaning on the palm of his hand. He is once again trying to evoke individual women and find some forgotten photograph for each one of them. This leads him to another interesting observation. Some of his lovers were especially adventurous in their erotic initiative and also quite striking in appearance, and yet they made hardly any mark on his soul and left no exciting photographs. He was much more intrigued by his memory of women whose erotic initiative was muffled and whose appearance was unremarkable, those whom he tended to underrate, as if memory, as well as forgetting, brought about a radical revaluation of all values. Whatever was willed, intentional, ostentatious, planned in his erotic life lost value, while adventures that happened unexpectedly, that did not announce themselves as something extraordinary, became in memory invaluable. He thought of the women raised in value by memory. One of them had surely passed the age when he would still wish to meet her. Others lived in circumstances that would make a meeting highly difficult. But then there was the lute player. He had not seen her for 8 years. 3 mental pictures came to his mind. In the first, she was standing a step away from him. Her arm was fixed in front of her face in the middle of a motion by which she seemed to be erasing her features. The second photograph captured the moment when he asked her with his hand on her breast whether anyone had ever touched her this way before, and she answered, no, in a quiet voice, her eyes looking straight ahead. And finally he saw her. That photograph was the most captivating of all. Standing in front of the mirror, flanked by 2 men with her palms covering her bare breasts. It was odd that in all 3 photographs her beautiful, motionless face had the same appearance. Looking straight ahead, past Rubens. He immediately looked up her phone number, which at one time he knew by heart. She spoke to him as if they had parted only yesterday. He flew to Paris to see her. This time he needed no special occasion. He came solely because of her, and met her in the same hotel where many years ago she had stood in front of the mirror, flanked by 2 men, and covered her breasts with her hands. The lute player still had the same figure, the same charming motions, and her features had lost nothing of their nobility. Only one thing had changed. From close up, her skin no longer looked fresh. Rubens could not help noticing, oddly enough, however, the moments he became aware of it were uncommonly brief, lasting hardly a few seconds. The lute player quickly turned back into her image, as drawn long ago in Rubens's memory. She concealed herself behind her image. Image. Rubens has known for a long time what that means. Hiding behind the bodies of his schoolmates on the bench in front of him, he secretly drew a caricature of the teacher. Then he lifted his eyes from his drawing. The teacher's features were in constant motion and did not resemble the picture. Nevertheless, whenever the teacher disappeared from his field of vision, Rubens was unable then and now to imagine him in any way other than in the form of his caricature. The teacher disappeared forever behind his image. At an exhibition of a famous photographer's work, he saw the picture of a man with a bloody face slowly lifting himself off the sidewalk. An unforgettable, mysterious photograph. Who was that man? What had happened to him? Probably an insignificant street accident, Rubens told himself. A wrong step, a fall, a photographer unexpectedly present. Not sensing anything unusual, the man got up, washed his face in a nearby cafe, and went home to his wife. And at the same moment, intoxicated by its birth, this image separated itself from him and walked off in the opposite direction after its own adventure, its own destiny. A person may conceal himself behind his image. He can disappear forever behind his image. He can be completely separated from his image. A man can never be his image. It was only thanks to 3 mental photographs that Rubens telephoned the lute player after not having seen her for 8 years. But who is the lute player in and of herself outside her image? He doesn't know much about that and has no desire to know more. I can see their meeting after 8 years. They sit facing each other in the lobby of a big Paris hotel. What do they talk about? About all sorts of things, except the life they are both leading. For if they knew each other too intimately, a barrier of useless information would pile up between them and estrange them from each other. They know only the barest minimum about each other, and they are almost proud of having concealed their lives in the shadows so that their meetings will be lit up all the more brightly, divorced from time and circumstance. Full of tenderness, he gazes at the lute player, happy that though she has aged somewhat, she still closely resembles her image. With some affectionate cynicism, he tells himself, the value of the physical presence of the lute player consists in her ability to continue merging with her image. And he looks forward to the quickly approaching moment when the lute player would lend this image her live body. They kept meeting again as in the old days, once, twice, 3 times a year, and again years passed. One day he called to tell her that he would arrive in Paris in 2 weeks. She told him she wouldn't have time. I can postpone my trip by a week, said Rubens. I won't have time then either. So when will it suit you? Not now, she said, obviously embarrassed. Not for a long time. Has something happened? No, nothing's happened. Both were embarrassed. It seemed that the lute player never wanted to see him again and found it difficult to tell him so outright. At the same time, however, this supposition was so improbable. Their meetings were always beautiful, without the least shadow. That Rubens kept asking her more questions in order to understand the reason for her rejection. But since from the very beginning their relationship had been founded on absolute mutual non-aggressiveness, that also ruled out any kind of insistence. He stopped himself from bothering her any further, even if only by way of question. So he ended the conversation and only added, "But may I call you?" "Naturally, why not?" He called her a month later. "You still have no time to see me?" "Don't be angry with me," she said. "It's nothing to do with you." He asked her the same question as last time. "Has something happened?" "No, nothing's happened," she said. He fell silent. He didn't know what to say. "Too bad," he said, smiling with melancholy into the receiver. "It's not anything to do with you. It really isn't. It only concerns me." He had the feeling that those words were opening some hope for him. "But then it's all nonsense. In that case, we must see each other." "No," she refused. "If I were certain that you don't want to see me anymore, I wouldn't say a word, but you said that this only concerns you. What's going on with you? We must see each other. I must talk to you." But the moment he said it, he told himself, no, alas, it's just her considerateness that prevents her from telling him the real reason. All too simple. She no longer cares for him. She is at a loss because she is too fine. That's why he mustn't try to win her over. She would find him unpleasant, and he would break the unwritten agreement that they should never ask anything from each other that the other does not wish. And so when she said once again, "Please, no," he no longer insisted. He put down the receiver and suddenly recalled the Australian student with the huge tennis shoes. She, too, was rejected for reasons she couldn't understand. If she had given him the opportunity, he would have consoled her with the same words. "It really isn't aimed against you. It has nothing to do with you. It only concerns me." All at once he grasped intuitively that the adventure with the lute player was over, and he would never understand why it had ended. Just as the Australian student would never understand why her story ended, his shoes would now walk the world with somewhat greater melancholy than before, just like the huge tennis shoes of the young Australian. The period of athletic muteness. The period of metaphors. The period of obscene truth, the period of telephone, the mystical period, all this was far behind him. The hands on the dial had brought his sexual life full circle. He found himself outside the dial's time. To find oneself outside the dial's time does not mean the end, nor does it mean death. On the dial of European painting, midnight had struck 2, and yet painters continue to paint. To be outside the dial's time simply means that no longer will anything new or important happen. Rubens continued to see women, but they were of no importance to him. The one he saw most often was G, a young woman whose main characteristic was a propensity to use coarse words in conversation. Many women did that. It was trendy. They said shit, fuck, asshole, and made it clear in this way that they did not belong to the old generation and its conservative manners, that they were liberated, emancipated, modern. And yet as soon as he touched her, G fixed her eyes on the ceiling and changed into a silent saint. Making love to her was always long and almost endless because she only reached orgasm, for which she eagerly longed. After great effort, she lay on her back, closed her eyes, and worked, perspiring all over. This is more or less how Rubens imagined the death agony. We burn with fever and long only for the end, which refuses to come. During their first 2 or 3 encounters, he tried to bring the end closer by whispering some obscene word to her, but because she always reacted by turning away her face as if in protest, he remained silent from then on. She, however, after some 20 or 30 minutes of lovemaking, always said, and Rubens found her voice dissatisfied and impatient, harder, harder, more, more, and at that point he always discovered that he couldn't go on, that he'd been making love too long and at too fast a tempo to be able to thrust any harder. He would therefore slide off her and resort to a method that he considered both a capitulation and a piece of technical virtuosity worthy of a patent. He stuck his hand inside her and moved his fingers powerfully upward. A geyser erupted. Everything was wet. She embraced him and showered him with tender words. It was astonishing how unable they were to synchronize their intimate clocks. When he was capable of tenderness, she talked coarsely. When he longed to talk coarsely, she kept stubbornly silent. When he felt like keeping still and going to sleep, she suddenly became talkatively tender. She was pretty and so much younger than he. Rubens assumed modestly that it was merely his manual dexterity that enticed G to come to him whenever he called her. He was grateful to her for allowing him, during those long intervals of silence and perspiration spent on top of her body, to dream with his eyes shut. Rubens came upon an old collection of photographs of President John Kennedy. The photos were in color. There were at least 50 of them. And on all of them, all without exception, the president was laughing. Not smiling, laughing. His mouth was open, his teeth bared. There was nothing remarkable about it. That's what contemporary photos are like. But the fact that Kennedy laughed in all of them, that not a single one showed him with his lips closed, gave Rubens pause. A few days later, he found himself in Florence. He stood in front of Michelangelo's David and tried to imagine that marble face laughing like Kennedy. David, that paradigm of male beauty, suddenly looked like an imbecile. Since then, he had often tried in his imagination to retouch figures in famous paintings, to give them a laughing mouth. It was an interesting experiment. The grimace of laughter could ruin every painting. Imagine Mona Lisa as her barely perceptible smile turns into a laugh that reveals her teeth and gums. We should have a dolphin swimming into the shot here, and maybe he's already in the shot. Even though he spent so much of his time in galleries, it took Kennedy's photographs to make Rubens realize this simple fact. The great painters and sculptors from classical days to Raphael and perhaps even to Ingres avoided portraying laughter, even smiles. Of course, the figures of Etruscan sculpture all have smiles, but the smile isn't a response to some particular momentary situation, but a permanent state of the face, expressing eternal bliss. For classical sculptors as well as for painters of later periods, a beautiful face was imaginable only in its immobility. Faces lost their immobility, mouths became open only when the painter wished to express evil. Either the evil of pain, the faces of women bent over the body of Jesus, the open mouth of the mother, and Poussin's slaughter of the innocents, or the evil of vice, whole beings, Adam and Eve. Eve has a bland face and a half-open mouth revealing teeth that have just bitten into the apple. Alongside Adam is a man still before sin. He is beautiful, his face is calm, and his mouth is closed. In Correggio's allegories of sin, everyone is smiling. In order to express vice, the painter must move the innocent calm of the face, to spread the mouth, to deform the features with a smile. There is only one laughing figure in the picture, a child. But it is not a laugh of happiness the way children are portrayed in advertisements for diapers or chocolate. The child is laughing because it's been corrupted. Only with the Dutch painters does laughter become innocent. Hall's clown or his gypsy, that's because the Dutch genre painters are the first photographers. The faces they paint are beyond ugliness or beauty. As he walked through the Dutch gallery, Rubens thought of the lute player. She was not a model for Hall's. The lute player was a model for painters who looked for beauty in the immovable surface of features. Then some visitors jostled him. All museums are filled with crowds of sightseers, as zoos once used to be. Tourists, hungry for attractions, stared at the pictures as if they were caged animals. Painting, thought Rubens, does not feel at home in this century, and neither does the lute player. The lute player belongs to a world vanished long ago in which beauty did not laugh. But how can we explain why great painters ruled laughter out of the realm of beauty? Rubens tells himself, undoubtedly, a face is beautiful because it reveals the presence of thought, whereas at the moment of laughter, man does not think. But is that really true? Is not laughter a lightning thought that has just grasped the comical? No, thinks Rubens. In the instant that he grasps the comical, man does not laugh. Laughter follows afterward, as a physical reaction, as a convulsion no longer containing any thought. Laughter is a convulsion of the face, and a convulsed person does not rule himself. He is ruled by something that is neither will nor reason, and that is why the classical sculptor did not express laughter. A human being who does not rule himself, a human being beyond reason, beyond will, cannot be considered beautiful. If our era against the spirit of the great painters has made laughter the privileged expression of the human face, it means that an absence of will and reason has become the ideal human state. The objection could be raised that the convulsion shown on photographic portraits is simulated and therefore subject to reason and will. Laughing into the camera lens, Kennedy is not reacting to a comic situation, but quite consciously opening his mouth and showing his teeth. But this only proves that the convulsion of laughter, a state beyond reason and will, has been raised by contemporary people into an ideal image behind which they have decided to conceal themselves. Rubens tells himself, laughter is the most democratic of all the facial expressions. We differ from one another by our immovable features, but in convulsion we are all the same. A bust of a laughing Julius Caesar is unthinkable. But American presidents depart for eternity concealed behind the democratic convulsion of laughter.